Hey everybody, welcome to Truth Be Told. Thanks very much for listening in. Today we're going to be talking about something that I hear all the time. So many claims about this person or this story in the Bible being made that is absolutely not what the Bible is saying. So we want to cover this to gain some clarity on what Scripture is actually telling us in this section that so often gets misinterpreted. We're going to be talking about the prophet Elijah, which is one of the biggest Old Testament prophets that there is. Maybe not in terms of amount written by him or about him, but definitely in terms of miracles that were done and New Testament influence. Elijah is, he's a big deal in the Old Testament. He did a lot of miracles, including ones that pointed to the person of Christ, that Christ himself actually showed himself to be a better version of, and I just think that's really cool. And then also the person that came after him, Elisha, did many of the same things that Elijah did because Elijah was so great. Elisha was kind of following in the footsteps of Elijah. God was establishing the authority of Elisha by showing that he was going to be doing the things that Elijah had done and more. Elijah's a big deal in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And one key event stands out in his life, and actually, more importantly, in what people believe to be his death, that just gets talked about constantly. And so we want to talk about this today because, like I said, it's just not what the Bible's saying. Elijah was a prophet of God during the reign of various kings in the northern tribes of Israel. So many prophets are sent to either the southern tribe of Judah or the northern tribes of Israel. He was primarily in the northern tribes of Israel. And many claim that he was one of a very select few people who was taken to heaven before he died and kind of translated in a very different way than anybody else who's ever lived. And there are a few others, and most people want to cite Enoch, who it says in Genesis walked with God and was not, for God took him. And this simply cannot be true unless we want to believe biblical contradiction, which I don't think any of us do. And actually, it takes a couple of biblical contradictions to reach the conclusion that Elijah went to heaven, as we would think of it anyways. First of all, many places in the Bible talk about God taking someone as death. In the book of Matthew, Jesus tells us about the end times and says, 2 will be in the field working, and 1 will be taken, and the other left. Now, often this gets interpreted as like a rapture event, like, oh, they're taken up into heaven, and maybe people would want to look at this as, oh yeah, just like Elijah, just like Enoch, they're kind of whisked away into the spiritual world, but they're still flesh and blood and, a physical person. But it's very, very clear in the context of this section that Jesus is talking about death. When the person is taken, it's death. Just like in the days of Noah, some were taken by the flood and others left, or, they remained on the earth, Noah and his family. We get this even more clearly in Isaiah 57, verses 1 through 2. It reads, "The righteous man perishes, and no one lays it to heart. Devout men are taken away while no one understands." In parallelism, you would know that taken away, perishes, those are the equivalent things being talked about. "For the righteous man is taken away from calamity. He enters into peace. They rest in their beds who walk in their uprightness." So, taken, death, same thing. Now, I agree. It is very odd, this section about Enoch, that he is described as being taken while everybody else is described as dead. But its oddity doesn't necessitate that he went to heaven. In my view, especially in light of this Isaiah 57, 1 through 2 verse, it seems to be that God allows people to live lives and die, but there are certain people that he has a hand in taking away or out of this life in order to spare them certain things that are going to go on the earth. And so to take them away just means that they didn't simply live and die, but that God intervened and took them as an active effort in, being party to their death in, a show of mercy to them for the righteous lives that they have lived. So it is odd, but it doesn't necessitate that it's they went to heaven, right? It doesn't say that specifically, but we would like to jump to that. And I believe later interpretations of Scripture about going to heaven after you die, which is not a doctrine that I hold to, is the culprit, basically, for why we would interpret it this way. I know many of you are saying, oh, this guy doesn't believe in going to heaven. What does he believe in? I'm not really getting into that today, but essentially, this view is getting more and more popular with people like N.T. Wright and Bible Project. But, I've held this belief my whole life that the Bible seems to talk about heaven coming to earth and people being raised from death, not me coming from heaven with Jesus back to the earth and then somehow him putting me back in my body or something. No, when I'm dead, I'm dead. I'm in the grave. The dead know nothing, as Ecclesiastes says. But when Christ comes back, I wait all the while until my change comes, as Job says. So when I die, I'm awaiting a resurrection from the dead when Jesus Christ returns and raises those who are his to immortality, and that is what I believe in. So that's the short of it. But I do believe this view of going to heaven when you die, that I don't think is supported by Scripture, is why we tend to read these sections as these people went to heaven in some sort of very special way. However, what's really interesting is if you hold the belief that people do go to heaven when they die, then what is so special about these two going to heaven? We want to point out, like, oh, they were very special, very righteous people. They went to heaven when they died, and very few people did. Well, what about Noah? He was righteous on the face of the earth. What about Job? He was righteous before God. Doesn't say anything about them going to heaven. What about David? He was a man after God's own heart. Imperfect people for sure, but who hasn't been? So, yeah, you want to say that everybody goes to heaven, but you want to point out these people as being special for going to heaven, and I think there's an inconsistency there. Even if you want to continue holding the belief that people do go to heaven when they die, we're still going to talk about this because these sections clearly do not talk about these people going to heaven. We're going to move past Enoch there. The point was just that the Lord taking somebody does not mean that they're going to heaven. Other parts of the Bible, in fact, definitely rule this out. John 3, verse 13, no man has ascended into heaven except the Son of Man who descended, meaning Jesus. So no person has been there except for the Son of Man who at that time was on the earth. So if no man has ascended to heaven up until the point that Jesus says this in John chapter 3, Elijah was a man, Enoch was a man, they did not ascend into heaven. So what is happening with Elijah's departure? Now, this section can be found in 2 Kings chapter 2, and it takes up a big portion of this chapter. It's very interesting. He's walking with his protege, Elisha, and it's very clear that everybody knows, like, Elijah is about to depart. And they even tell Elisha, like, this is coming, like, this is going to happen. I don't know how they knew it. Doesn't seem very clear to me. But it seems clear to most people, and Elisha's not happy about it. He's like, oh, like, I don't even want to think about it. Like, I'm not leaving his side. I'm not ready maybe to go on and be the prophet that I'm supposed to be outside of his tutelage. And so he follows Elijah and he says, I'm not leaving your side. But sure enough, they cross over the Jordan from Israel into kind of the wilderness area. They cross over the Jordan into the nation of Jordan, and they're there. Elijah does another miracle of hitting the waves with his cloak, and the waves split open and they cross over. Some cool things happen, and then Elijah says, I'm going to leave now. Like, this is what's happening. What do you want before I go? And Elisha says, I want a double measure of your spirit. Like, I want to be walking with the blessing and the calling that God has given you. Like, if I have to do this job, I want God to work through me in an even greater way than he did through you, not because I want status for myself, but because presumably it's because he feels maybe not even as equipped as Elijah was. And so the thing he's asking for, while it sounds on the surface to be a little bit like, okay, like high and mighty, you want 2 times his spirit, really it could easily be saying, I need more help than you. And so Elijah says, well, if it's going to be done for you, if you see me taken away, then you'll know it's going to be done for you. And then a chariot of fire with flaming horses comes out of heaven and whisks Elijah away in a whirlwind. And it even says Elijah is taken from you. It doesn't say to heaven. Now, it does say he went up in a whirlwind into heaven, but let's be careful about English translations of things. The word there is hashamayim, and it means heaven or it means sky. It's the same word when it says that God created the heavens and the earth, which then we wouldn't say, well, he made the place he was. We would say, I also believe that too, that God created all things, but, where God is almost, I think of it more like dimensionality or something. But when God created the heavens and the earth, it's very much talking about the skies and the land and the water. So like 3-tiered structure of creation. And that word, hashamayim, means the sky or the heavens. And this is why there's this belief in ancient Judaism that there were actually 7 heavens. And this is, I don't believe, an accurate view. I think this is when Judaism got very much mixed up with astrology. And the 7 heavens referred to 7 astrological bodies or stars, meaning Mercury, Venus, Mars, the Sun, the Moon, Jupiter, and Saturn. The 7th heaven was like the ultimate, the highest heaven, and it was the abode of God. But clearly, in the Bible, Paul talks about being taken up into the 3rd heaven where God was in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. So we know that in Scripture there is a cultural precedent for a multi-tiered heaven. This word, hashamayim, does not have to mean God's home. It could just as easily mean the sky. This word is a tiered word, so we have to ask ourselves, well, which word or, which word should be used or which idea is trying to be communicated here? So aside from the fact, and we can get this from context of the story about Elijah, but aside from the fact that no man has ascended into heaven, meaning where God is, except for him who descended from the Father, we know that this word doesn't mean the 3rd heaven where God was, because that verse makes it very clear, but it's still kind of weird. What is going on here? How do we get to a better understanding of what's being communicated? What do we need to read further in order to clarify that Elijah was not, in fact, taken up into heaven in some very special way? I think I've proved it logically and biblically in a way that shows the impossibility if we're going to hold that other statements are also true. But there's another part of the Bible that people completely gloss over, even within the context of Elijah's own story, that completely blows the idea that he went to be with God in his physical form in some very special manner of death because of his righteousness right out of the water. We have further evidence that Elijah did not go to dwell with God, but was simply taken away from Elisha into essentially the sky and then to another place. And we get this evidence in 2 Chronicles chapter 21. This is years after Elijah was done prophesying. So you can look it up. Elijah was a prophet during the reigns of various kings. Now, we get this other king, Jehoram from Judah, who Elijah was not primarily a prophet to, but Jehoram was a king in Judah, and he reigned well after Elijah was taken away in the whirlwind by a chariot of fire. And yet, at this time, in 2 Chronicles 21, you can read this for yourself, a letter comes to King Jehoram from Elijah. Now, my question is, did the authors forget that he was supposed to be dead or in heaven in some disembodied way? No. Elijah was simply alive, but taken away from the main stage of the biblical narrative. He was taken somewhere else. He was probably taken up into the heavens as a type, yes, as a foreshadowing of Jesus to come, who would be taken up into the heavens. But like all types, it falls just short of the fulfillment, where Christ was taken up into the heaven where God dwells. He ascended to the Father. Elijah was taken up into heaven, but and visually, this is what it would have looked like. He disappeared into the sky. But it's very clear that the biblical authors are aware that he is still alive, because they put this portion of him writing a letter to King Jehoram of Judah in the Chronicles. So we know that he's living somewhere. this fulfillment, or this type, sorry, not the fulfillment, this type of Elijah going into heaven, just like Christ goes into heaven, falls short of the fulfilled type that Jesus Christ then lives in his life, resurrection, and ascension. Where did he go? We don't actually know this. Elijah gave his mantle, like physically his mantle, but also like this is where the phrase comes from, like passing on the mantle. He gives his mantle or his cloak to Elisha, and he goes away. He fades from the biblical scene. He was taken by God in a chariot of fire up into the sky to a different location, where he then wrote this letter to King Jehoram of Judah. Possibly he was on the other side of the Jordan. Otherwise, it's kind of weird to go out in the wilderness and then, go back into Israel that way. I don't really know. Or maybe that was just to bring Elisha back into the promised land by virtue of crossing over the Jordan, just like Israel did before, as kind of another type. I don't know. But maybe he went across the Jordan, lived in the wilderness somewhere. Or maybe he went to Judah, which would explain why he's familiar with events in the tribe of the southern kingdom of Judah, and then writes this letter to Jehoram. We're simply not told, and it's simply not important. But what is certain is that he was not translated to heaven while alive. It's no less miraculous, it's no less singular, it's no less amazing. But we need to remember to let the Bible say what it says and be honest about that. I see so many theologians, very trained, intelligent thinkers, who know the Bible forward and backward, but maybe just have studied it for so long with the common understanding they've had of something that they just repeat the things they've heard for a long time. I'm probably guilty of this too. Everybody is, but we need to be careful of it. Or potentially, because we're reading the Bible and it's not in exact chronological order, we can read that section kind of isolated in 2 Chronicles 21 of Elijah's letter to Jehoram and say, yeah, Elijah, that happened, forgetting that it comes after the time he was supposed to be taken up into heaven, where earlier some preacher might have preached that he's, dead or disembodied in a heavenly place with God. We know this didn't happen. The Bible's very clear on it. I don't know why we make the mistake or continue on thinking like this, but I've wanted to do this video for a while because I keep on hearing it stated from people, and it sounds cool, it sounds fantastical, but it just simply can't be true if we're going to take the Bible for what it says.